Daddy, the baby looks sick. 5 words stopped a billionaire in his tracks. Moments later, Edward Wallace, a man who never slowed down for anyone, was kneeling in the snow before a homeless mother, and nothing in his world would ever be the same. Before we jump in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what kind of story do you crave next? Drop your answer in the comments below. If stories like this grip your heart and refuse to let go, well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got another powerful story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get into today's story. Snowflakes floated lazily through the pale Chicago sky, dusting the empty park benches in white. The city, still waking from a long night, moved at half speed, its towers veiled in mist, its streets glimmering with a thin crust of ice. A black Mercedes rolled to a quiet stop beside the park's entrance, its headlights cutting through the morning fog. Edward Wallace stepped out first. Tall, poised, dressed in a navy wool coat and black gloves, he looked like a man born from marble, polished, composed, unbothered. Beside him, a small figure hopped down from the car, boots crunching in the snow. "Stay close, sweetheart," he said softly. "I will, Daddy," replied Emma, tugging her beige knit hat lower over her curls. They walked together down the icy path, her mittened hand swallowed by his. For Emma, the morning was magic, snow falling like powdered sugar, the park glimmering like something out of a fairy tale. For Edward, it was routine. Peaceful, predictable, necessary. He had built his empire on order, control, and detachment. Even his walks with Emma were scheduled between board meetings and investor calls. But beneath the surface calm, loneliness still gnawed, a quiet ache that even his wealth could not quiet. It had been 3 years since Clara's death. Since then, Edward had traded joy for efficiency, love for silence. Emma's voice snapped him back. "Daddy, what's wrong with that lady?" Edward followed her gaze toward a weathered wooden bench near the field. A young woman sat there, motionless, her head resting against the backrest as if she had drifted off. In her arms, barely visible beneath a threadbare blanket, was a baby. Tiny. Still. Emma stepped closer. "Daddy, the baby, he looks sick." Her voice trembled with urgency. Edward's heart lurched, but his instincts warred. He was a man who signed checks, not miracles. He'd seen poverty before, always from the tinted glass of his car. This was too close. He should have walked on. But Emma didn't move. Her wide eyes, full of fear and innocence, pinned him to the spot. The woman, Amber Robinson, though he didn't yet know her name, looked fragile. Her skin was pale beneath the cold, her hands trembling as they clutched the child. The baby let out a weak, wheezing sound. Something inside Edward cracked. He bent down, unwrapping the red scarf from around Emma's neck. "Daddy," she whispered. He only said, "We are going to help." Kneeling in the snow, Edward draped the scarf gently across the infant's chest. The color, a streak of red against the white world, looked almost symbolic. The baby stirred faintly, his lips tinged blue. Amber's eyes fluttered open. For a second, confusion replaced exhaustion. Then fear. "No, please, don't take him," she gasped, clutching her baby tighter. Edward raised a steady hand. "I'm not taking him. But your baby's in trouble. He needs warmth. He needs a doctor." She shook her head, her voice raw and hoarse. "We are fine." "You're not." His tone softened. "Let me help." Her eyes darted between him, his expensive coat, the child by his side. Years of distrust, of promises broken, flashed behind them. "People only help when they want something," she whispered. Edward's throat tightened. "Not this time." Another cough racked the baby's small body. That sound silenced everything. Emma smiled shyly. Daddy said you were really tired. I drew you something." She held up a sheet of paper covered in bright crayons, 3 stick figures holding hands under a snowy sky. One was tall, one small, and one with dark braids like hers. Amber's throat tightened. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Before she could ask more, the door opened. Edward stepped in, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. He'd changed into a charcoal sweater and black coat, his expression calm but tired. He looked different here, not just powerful, but human. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Amber tried to sit up, embarrassed by the hospital gown and the state of her hair. "I'm fine. My baby, Malik." His stable, Edward said quickly, pulling a chair closer. They have him in the pediatric ward. Mild pneumonia and dehydration, but the doctors say he'll recover. Her eyes closed as relief washed through her. Thank God. Edward hesitated, then added, I covered the medical costs. You don't need to worry about anything right now. Amber's head jerked up, eyes flashing with panic. No, I can't. Please don't do that. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, he said calmly. It's what any decent person would do. You don't even know me. I didn't need to. His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. You were sitting in the snow with a dying baby. That was enough. She looked away, ashamed and defensive all at once. Pride was the only thing she had left, and even that felt threadbare. I just need to see him, she murmured. Edward nodded. You can, as soon as you're strong enough. The doctors want you to rest a few hours first. Amber's eyes drifted to the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and endless. She wondered what kind of life this man led, one where he could spend a fortune without blinking, where kindness came wrapped in quiet confidence instead of judgment. A few minutes passed in silence. Emma was now coloring on the small table near the window, humming softly to herself. The sound filled the room like music. Edward stood finally, clearing his throat. When Malik is discharged, you'll need somewhere warm for him to recover. I have a guest house attached to my home. It's private, quiet. You and your son can stay there until he's well enough to travel. Amber's chest tightened. You mean live in your house? Just temporarily, he said evenly. I'll arrange everything. Food, clothes, anything you need. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't want him to see. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Edward's voice lowered, almost as if confessing to himself. Because once, someone should have helped my wife, and no one did. The words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Amber shook her head, clutching the blanket. I can't. It's too much. I don't belong in a place like that. Edward didn't argue. He simply said, You don't have to decide now. But later, when she walked into the pediatric ward and saw Malik, his small chest rising and falling under the oxygen tube, his breath shallow but steady, her resolve broke. His tiny fingers twitched around her thumb. She knew what she had to do. When she returned to her room, Edward was by the window, phone in hand. She stopped in the doorway, trembling. I'll come, she said quietly. Just until he's better. He turned, nodded once, and for the first time since she'd met him, a small smile touched his lips. Good. That evening, the city glowed beneath a darkening sky as Edward's car pulled up before his Lakeview penthouse. The building's glass exterior reflected the snow like 1,000 stars. Amber stepped out hesitantly, clutching Malik, now asleep and bundled warmly. Her breath caught when she entered the lobby, marble floors gleaming like water, golden light pouring from chandeliers, a fireplace flickering beneath a painting that probably cost more than her life savings. She followed silently as Edward led them through a private elevator to the upper floor. When the doors opened, warmth enveloped her completely. The penthouse was all soft light and quiet music, with wide windows overlooking the frozen lake. This way, Edward said, guiding her toward a guest suite. Inside was a plush bed covered in white linens, a small crib already waiting by the window, and shelves stocked with baby formula, diapers, and clothes. The sight made her knees go weak. I can't stay here, she whispered. It's too beautiful. I'll break something just by breathing. Edward's lips curved faintly. You won't. When he left her alone, Amber stood in the bathroom staring at her reflection. The mirror showed a stranger, hollow cheeks, tangled hair, eyes that had forgotten how to shine. She turned on the shower, and when the warm water hit her skin, she wept silently. Weeks of fear, cold, and hunger washed down the drain. Later, wrapped in a soft robe, she tiptoed to the crib. Malik slept peacefully for the first time in his short life, his small chest moving steadily, his cheeks pink with warmth. She brushed a tear from his forehead and whispered, We are safe, baby. Just for tonight, we are safe. Outside the door, Edward lingered in the dim hallway, watching through the narrow crack. Emma stood beside him, holding his hand. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. She looks lonely, Daddy. Edward's gaze stayed on the woman in the room, her silhouette bent over the crib, tender and tired. His throat tightened, the words rough when they finally came. So do we, sweetheart. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that maybe loneliness didn't have to last forever. What would you have done if you were Edward? Walked away, or stopped to help? Tell us your thoughts below. The words lingered long after the lights in the penthouse dimmed and the city below faded into the soft hum of night. Amber didn't hear them. She was too lost in exhaustion, curled protectively beside Malik's crib. But Edward did. Those 4 words echoed in his head as he stood by the window, staring out at the frost-tipped skyline. For the first time in years, the silence inside his home didn't feel like a punishment. It felt shared. Over the next few days, the Wallace penthouse took on a rhythm it hadn't known in years. Morning sunlight filtered through tall glass windows, cutting through the still air that had once belonged only to him and Emma. The sound of quiet laughter replaced the usual sterile hum of the city below. Amber tried her best to repay the kindness she didn't understand. She folded blankets that didn't need folding, wiped already spotless counters, and tidied rooms where not a thing was out of place. She would rise before dawn, her hair still damp from a shower, and slip quietly into the kitchen to make breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, sometimes pancakes she learned from her mother long ago. When Edward walked in one morning to find her carefully plating food, he frowned slightly. "You don't have to do that." Amber looked up, startled. "I just wanted to help." He crossed the marble floor, resting his hands on the back of a chair. "You're my guest, not my employee. You've done enough by just being here." Her jaw tightened as if she'd been scolded. "I can't just sit around doing nothing." Edward's expression softened. "Then at least eat with us," he said quietly. So she did. For the first time since she could remember, she sat at a table with real plates, real warmth, and real conversation. Emma chatted endlessly about school projects and snowmen, her innocent energy a balm to the heaviness in the air. Amber listened more than she spoke, her eyes occasionally darting toward the baby monitor on the counter where Malik slept in the nursery down the hall. When breakfast ended, Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Amber, can we draw together?" Amber smiled faintly. "Of course." They spent the afternoon on the living room rug surrounded by crayons and paper. Emma's small hands moved with excitement, sketching stick figures with curly hair and smiling suns. Amber, whose fingers once held medical charts and 4 syringes, found herself sketching too, soft outlines of Malik's face, the curve of a mother's arm, the quiet joy of safety. She hadn't drawn in years. As they worked, she caught Edward watching from the hallway. He stood with a mug in hand, his posture relaxed for once. The faint smile that tugged at his mouth was something even he didn't recognize anymore. But beneath the comfort, Amber's unease never left. Every shadow reminded her how fragile safety could be. That night, while Malik slept soundly in his crib and Emma drifted off in her own room, Amber sat by the window wrapped in a grey blanket. The city lights glimmered like distant stars. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, healthier, calmer, but wary. Always wary. Her mind drifted back to the night that ended everything. She had been a nurse then, bright, ambitious, and proud to work in pediatrics. Children trusted her instantly. She could calm a crying newborn faster than any doctor on shift. But one December evening, the world collapsed in a single breath. A child under her care went into sudden cardiac arrest. The equipment malfunctioned. The attending physician, Dr. Henry Cooper, had been drinking that night, though no one dared to say it. Amber did everything she could, every compression, every code call, but it wasn't enough. The little boy was gone before sunrise. When the hospital needed someone to blame, it was her name on the report. Negligence. Failure to follow protocol. Lies wrapped in paperwork. Dr. Cooper denied everything. Her fiancé, Daniel, stood by her at first, until the media caught wind of it. Then his voice stopped answering her calls. His last message had been a single line: "I can't be tied to this." She lost her job, her license, her reputation. And soon after, she learned she was pregnant. By the time her name cleared in whispers, too late, too quiet, she was already living in shelters, avoiding the world that had turned its back. A soft knock at the door pulled her from the memory. Edward's voice came quietly through. "Amber, is everything all right?" She hesitated, wiping her eyes before answering. "Yes. Sorry. I didn't mean to wake anyone." He stood in the doorway, concern in his eyes. "You didn't. I couldn't sleep." He walked in, hands tucked into his pockets. The low lamplight carved soft shadows along his face. "I heard Malik coughing earlier. Is he okay?" She nodded. "He's fine. Just a little congestion." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them fragile but comfortable. Edward finally said, "You don't have to keep proving you deserve to be here." Amber's gaze fell to her hands. "You don't understand. I've had everything taken from me because I trusted the wrong people. It's hard to believe anyone's being kind for no reason." He looked at her then, not as a CEO accustomed to power, but as a man who knew the cost of grief. "Maybe kindness doesn't need a reason," he said softly. Their eyes met, something unspoken lingering between them before Emma's sleepy voice drifted from the hallway. "Daddy." Edward turned. "Go back to bed, sweetheart." But Emma toddled in, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Can I stay here? I don't like my room when it's dark." Amber smiled gently. "Come here." She lifted the little girl onto her lap, tucking the blanket around her. Within minutes, Emma's breathing evened out, her small head resting against Amber's shoulder. Edward watched, his chest tightening with a strange mix of gratitude and ache. For years, his home had felt hollow, even when filled with luxury. But now, seeing his daughter safe in another woman's arms, a woman who carried pain but still gave warmth, he felt something shift deep inside him. The next few days unfolded quietly. Amber started helping with Emma's lessons, reading bedtime stories in her soft, soothing voice. Edward found excuses to linger nearby, reviewing reports on his laptop at the table, though his eyes often lifted to watch them. Laughter became a sound he didn't flinch from anymore. But outside those walls, whispers began. Staff members exchanged glances. Neighbors asked subtle questions. "Who's the woman with the baby? Did Mr. Wallace remarry? She doesn't look like she belongs." Edward brushed them off at first. But one evening, as Amber carried dishes from dinner to the sink, she paused near the hallway. His voice carried from his office, low, tense. "No, she's not my charity case," he was saying into the phone. "She's someone who needed help, and I wasn't going to look away." A pause. Then softer, his voice breaking just enough to betray something else. "It's not about image. It's about doing what's right." Amber froze, her breath catching. His tone wasn't defensive, it was protective. And beneath that protection was something raw, almost vulnerable. She slipped quietly back into the kitchen before he could see her, her heart beating too fast. No one had ever defended her like that before. No one had ever cared to. Later that night, when Edward passed through the hallway, he found her asleep on the couch, Malik cradled in her arms, Emma curled up beside her like a kitten. He stood for a long while, watching them. The image felt too perfect, too fragile to disturb. For the first time since losing Clara, he realized his home wasn't haunted by memories anymore. It was being rewritten. Do you believe kindness between strangers can grow into something deeper? Write your thoughts about Amber and Edward's bond below. But sometimes, even the gentlest winds carry whispers that can shatter fragile peace. It began with a photograph, one that neither Edward nor Amber even knew existed. A grainy image taken weeks earlier, Edward stepping out of the hospital, Malik bundled in his arms, Amber walking beside him in her worn coat, eyes downcast against the cold. Emma's small mittened hand clutched Edward's sleeve. It was a picture of quiet humanity, of compassion caught in motion, but to the media, it became something else entirely. By sunrise, the photo had gone viral. Widowed CEO's mystery woman and baby, secret family, splashed across glossy tabloids. Online forums lit up with speculation. Who is she? Is Wallace hiding an affair? Is that his child? By the time Edward arrived at Wallace Holdings headquarters that morning, his assistant looked pale. "It's everywhere, sir," she said, sliding a tablet across the desk. "They're demanding a statement." He stared at the image for a long time. In another life, it might have made him smile. But the words wrapped around it were poison. In the boardroom, his PR director spoke quickly, her tone clipped. "Edward, with respect, this looks bad. A homeless woman and a baby living in your home. It's already creating a narrative we can't control. Investors are nervous. The press wants answers." Edward set the tablet down. "Answers about what?" "That I helped someone in need." "That you're emotionally compromised," she replied carefully. "Your judgment could be called into question. We're advising that you make a public clarification. Say it was a temporary act of charity. And, well, that she's no longer staying at your residence." The room fell into heavy silence. Edward's jaw tightened. "You want me to send her away because of gossip?" The head of communications cleared his throat. "It's about perception, sir. Your brand is built on control, not compassion. Edward leaned back slowly, his voice low. Maybe that's the problem. But even as he said it, his mind drifted to Amber, probably at home with Emma, unaware of the chaos outside. He imagined her expression if she saw the headlines. The humiliation. The shame. When he returned to the penthouse that evening, everything felt too still. Emma was playing quietly on the rug, her crayons scattered around her. The air held a weight that hadn't been there before. Amber wasn't in the kitchen, or the living room, or the nursery. It was Emma who handed him the folded note, her blue eyes wet with confusion. "Daddy, she left this." Edward froze. The handwriting was small, careful. "Edward, thank you for everything you've done, for me and Malik. You gave us safety when we had nothing. I can't let my presence destroy your reputation or your company. Please don't look for us. Some kindnesses aren't meant to last. Amber." His chest constricted. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then he dropped the letter and grabbed his coat. Emma ran after him, tears streaking her cheeks. "Daddy, you have to find her. Please, don't let her go again." He knelt down, cupping her small face in his hands. "I won't, sweetheart. I promise." Outside, snow was falling fast. The streets blurred in white as Edward's car tore through the night, headlights slicing through fog and flurries. His mind raced with memories. Amber's soft laughter as Emma read her stories, Malik's small fingers clutching his thumb. He couldn't lose them, not like this. He found her outside a downtown shelter, sitting on the same kind of bench where it all began. Malik was in her arms, coughing softly, his tiny face pressed against her coat. Amber's eyes lifted when she saw him, shock and panic flashing across her face. "Edward, what are you doing here?" Her voice trembled, breath visible in the cold. He stepped closer, snow gathering in his dark hair. "Looking for you." "You shouldn't have." She hugged Malik tighter. "You've already done enough. The press, your company, they're saying terrible things. I can't be the reason you lose everything." "Lose everything?" He laughed bitterly. "Amber, I've had everything and still felt empty. You think I care what they print?" She shook her head, tears glinting under the streetlight. "You don't understand. They'll destroy you for helping someone like me." Edward's voice softened. "Then let them." The words hung between them, raw and defiant against the howling wind. He reached out and gently brushed a snowflake from Malik's blanket. "You're not going anywhere, Amber. Neither of you." Her lips parted, but no words came. All the fight seemed to drain from her shoulders. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because," he said, his voice breaking, "for the first time since Clara died, I feel alive again. Because you matter. Because this," he gestured between them, at the fragile, freezing space that connected two broken worlds, "is the first thing that's felt right in a long time." Amber looked at him, her expression torn between disbelief and something deeper. "Hope, maybe. But your company." He cut her off gently. "I built that company to control everything I couldn't save. Maybe it's time I stop trying to control and start caring." A gust of wind swept through the park, shaking loose flakes from the bare branches overhead. Malik whimpered softly. Without another word, Edward took off his coat and wrapped it around them both. Then he helped her to her feet. They walked together through the snow, the city lights flickering like distant fireflies. Amber said nothing, her head bowed, but she didn't pull away when Edward's arm brushed hers. When they reached the car, he opened the door for her as he had the first night they met. Only this time, she didn't hesitate. Back at the penthouse, Emma was waiting by the window, face pressed to the glass. When she saw them, she ran to the door and threw herself at Amber's legs. "You came back." Amber knelt, hugging her tightly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she whispered. "I shouldn't have left." Edward watched the two of them, emotion welling in his throat. It wasn't charity, and it wasn't obligation, it was choice. For once, he wasn't acting as CEO Edward Wallace, but simply as a man following what was right. Later that night, after Malik was tucked safely in bed and Emma finally drifted to sleep, Amber stood by the window, staring out at the glowing skyline. Edward joined her, their reflections side by side in the glass. "You really meant it," she said softly. "You don't care what they say." He nodded. "Let them talk. They've been talking about me for years, and none of it ever mattered until now." Amber turned toward him. "You'll lose friends. Maybe business partners." He smiled faintly. then they were never worth keeping. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the city glittering beneath them like frozen stars. Then Edward said quietly, "You once told me you didn't believe people helped without wanting something in return. Do you still believe that?" Amber hesitated, looking down. "I don't know what to believe anymore." He stepped closer, his voice a whisper. "Then believe this, you're not alone anymore." She met his gaze, tears glimmering in her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from something she hadn't felt in a very long time: belonging. Outside, the wind howled over the city, carrying the rumors away like dust. Inside, warmth returned. Not the warmth of fire or comfort, but of trust being born in the coldest place possible, two hearts finally daring to thaw. Do you think Edward was right to defy the world for Amber? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts below. But warmth, as Amber would soon learn, can draw shadows too. The brighter the light, the longer the darkness that stretches behind it. The next few weeks brought a fragile sense of normalcy. Malik's health improved, his once raspy breaths now replaced by soft giggles that filled the penthouse halls. Amber found a rhythm, early mornings helping Emma get ready for school, afternoons spent tending to small chores despite Edward's protests, evenings filled with quiet laughter and the distant hum of a city still learning to be kind. Yet peace is rarely permanent. It started with a notification on Edward's phone, a link forwarded by his head of PR. The subject line read simply, "You'll want to see this." The article was brutal. A photo of Amber, smiling faintly beside Malik, captioned in bold type, "Disgraced nurse at center of CEO scandal." The piece dragged her past into the light, her termination from St. Luke's Hospital, the malpractice case, and the whispers of a child who died under her care. What it didn't tell was the truth. That she had been scapegoated. That the real negligence belonged to Dr. Henry Cooper, her supervising physician, who had falsified reports to save his own career. Edward's chest tightened as he scrolled. They called her a manipulator, a liar, a con artist who used tragedy and charm to ensnare the city's most powerful widower. He slammed the laptop shut. Downstairs, Amber was feeding Malik when he appeared in the doorway. The look on his face made her heart drop. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Edward hesitated, then crossed the room and set the laptop on the table. "They found your name." Amber stared at the screen. Her hands trembled as she read the words. Her old life, the one she'd buried under frost and silence, now laid bare for millions to consume. "Oh God," she whispered, voice cracking. "Not again." Edward reached for her hand. "Amber, listen to me." But she pulled away, pacing. "I told you this would happen. People don't forget scandal, Edward. They don't forgive women like me. Women like you." His voice hardened. "You mean honest, brave, and falsely accused?" She shook her head, tears forming. "You don't understand. They made sure everyone believed it was my fault. The hospital board, Cooper, they ruined me. And now they'll ruin you too." Edward's jaw clenched. Let them try. But he knew it wasn't that simple. Already, calls were flooding in, shareholders worried, clients hesitating, journalists circling like wolves. And somewhere among them, Grant Maddox, his oldest rival, was waiting to strike. By the end of the week, Grant's fingerprints were everywhere. Leaked emails, insinuations to reporters, headlines twisting kindness into scandal. Wallace's mistress or charity case. Sources claim CEO's relationship began before wife's death. The lies spread faster than the truth could catch up. At Wallace Holdings, the board meeting turned tense. The table was a fortress of suits and suspicion. Edward sat at the head, his expression calm but unreadable. "Edward," one of the senior board members began carefully, "the company's image is suffering. Investors are uneasy. This woman, Miss Robinson, her presence in your home, it's untenable." Another chimed in. "Our PR team says cutting ties publicly could salvage things. We can release a statement clarifying she's no longer under your care." Edward's gaze swept the table. "So you want me to throw her out into the cold again, because it's convenient?" "We are protecting the company," the man replied firmly. "Your personal involvement has created moral and financial exposure. She's become a liability." Edward leaned forward slowly. "She's not a liability," he said. "She's a human being who's endured more than any of you could imagine. She saved my daughter's heart. She reminded me what compassion looks like. If that's bad for business, then maybe business needs to change." The room went silent. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Another director cleared his throat. "Then what do you propose?" Edward's reply was simple. "We give her a role." Confusion rippled through the board. "A role?" "Yes," he said. "Amber will head our new Wallace Foundation for Child Wellness, a charity initiative focused on pediatric care and support for homeless mothers. She knows what the world looks like from the ground. She's exactly who we need to lead it." The uproar was immediate. "Edward, you can't. This is reckless." He stood, straightening his tie. "If compassion is scandalous," he said evenly, "then I'm proud to be guilty." The next morning, the press exploded again, but this time, Edward controlled the story. Cameras flashed as he stood behind a podium, Amber by his side, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Emma and Malik watched from the wings with Mrs. Hill. "Miss Robinson has faced unjust scrutiny," Edward began, his voice steady and sure. "But her story is one of strength, not scandal. The Wallace Foundation will be her chance, and mine, to ensure no child suffers because compassion makes headlines." Reporters shouted questions, but Amber barely heard them. She was too busy trying not to cry. Later, as they rode the elevator back up to his office, she finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." Edward looked at her. "Yes, I did." "You've made yourself a target," she said softly. "They'll come after you next." He smiled faintly. "Let them. I've faced bigger monsters than gossip." Amber looked away, her throat tight. Gratitude warred with guilt. She didn't deserve this. His defense, his faith, his friendship that felt dangerously close to something deeper. And yet, she couldn't stop her heart from wanting what her mind feared. That night, after Emma was asleep, Amber lingered in the kitchen, cleaning dishes she didn't need to clean. Edward walked in quietly, loosening his tie. "You don't have to keep doing that," he said gently. She smiled without turning around. "I need to keep busy." He leaned against the counter, studying her. "You're worried." "I'm realistic," she replied. "You've risked everything for me." He crossed the room, his voice low. "Amber, what I risked was my pride. What I gained was something real." Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for a heartbeat, neither looked away. There was tension, unspoken and fragile, like the space before a flame catches. "Edward," she whispered, "I can't ruin your life." He stepped closer. "You're not ruining it," he said softly. "You're saving it." Amber's breath hitched. She turned away quickly, gripping the counter for support. "Don't say things like that," she murmured. He smiled sadly. "Why not? They're true." For a long moment, silence filled the room, comfortable, intimate, dangerous. Later, lying awake in the guest room, Amber stared at the ceiling, Malik sleeping peacefully beside her. She replayed every word, every glance, every kindness that chipped away at the wall she'd built. She had promised herself never to trust again, never to love again. But Edward had made both feel possible, and terrifying. Down the hall, Edward sat by his office window, staring out over the glittering city. The storm outside was quiet for now, but he could feel it brewing. Grant Maddox wouldn't stop. The media wouldn't relent. The world wasn't kind to stories like theirs. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. For the first time in years, he felt something other than guilt. He felt purpose. In another room, Amber whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone could hear. "Please don't let me destroy the only good thing left." Neither of them slept much that night. And somewhere in the city, Grant Maddox poured himself a drink, watching their press conference replay on the news. A slow, predatory smile curved his lips. "Let the philanthropist have his moment," he muttered. "The fall will hurt that much more." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, deceptive, and cold. Do you think Edward's public stand for Amber was brave, or reckless? Would you risk your reputation to defend someone you love? But this time, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the world was holding its breath before another storm. Grant Maddox had promised himself he'd wait, watch Edward Wallace bask in his heroic glow before striking. And he did. For nearly 2 weeks, the city hailed Edward as a symbol of compassion, his foundation gaining attention, his reputation on the mend. Amber's gentle presence at his side made headlines for all the right reasons. From tragedy to triumph, one article read. Until the day the lies came. It began with an email. Then a dozen. By morning, every news network had it. The so-called leaked settlement documents from St. Luke's Hospital, complete with Amber Robinson's forged signature. The files claimed she had accepted a $250,000 payout in exchange for her silence about the malpractice case. It looked official: dates, signatures, account numbers. The narrative changed overnight. Disgraced nurse took hush money. CEO's charity project exposed as cover-up for lover scandal. Wallace's compassion funded by lies. The backlash was instant and vicious. By noon, Wallace Holdings stock dropped 9%. Cameras crowded the front of the headquarters, protesters shouting into the blizzard, waving signs that read "Fire her" and "Corruption" in high heels. Inside, Edward stood before his office window, his reflection fractured in the glass. On the news behind him, Amber's photo filled the screen, her eyes tired, her baby in her arms. "She didn't take money," he said, voice barely audible. His PR director spoke cautiously. "Sir, the documents. They're fake." "Even if they are," she said gently, "the optics are bad. People believe what they see. The board's demanding a statement. They think Miss Robinson should step down, publicly." Edward turned sharply. "Step down? She's not an employee in disgrace. She's a human being hunted." "Sir," the woman pressed, "you have to think of the company. One more hit like this, and you could lose the merger, the investors, everything you've built." Edward's reply was quiet but sharp as ice. "Everything I've built doesn't mean a damn thing if it costs me my soul." But even as he said it, his chest ached. Because behind his anger lay fear, the kind he hadn't felt since the night his wife died. The fear of losing something fragile and irreplaceable. Amber. Downstairs, in the penthouse suite, Amber sat at the kitchen counter with her head buried in her hands. The television blared her name again and again, cutting into every channel. She had stopped fighting it hours ago. Every word was poison now. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Reporters, old co-workers, strangers from social media. Even Dr. Cooper's name appeared on the screen once, and she couldn't bring herself to answer. When Edward arrived home, she didn't look up. "It's everywhere," she whispered. "I know," he said. "We'll fix it." Amber's laugh was soft, bitter. "You can't fix this. You've already done too much for me, and look where it got you." He sat across from her, his eyes steady. "I don't regret a thing." "You should," she said, voice trembling. "You're losing everything because of me." He shook his head. "I'm losing nothing that matters." Amber lifted her gaze then, her eyes red, her face pale and exhausted. "What about Emma? What about her life when the kids at school start whispering about her father and the homeless woman he took in?" He hesitated. That struck deeper than he'd admit. "I can handle the world," he said finally. "But I can't handle you walking away." Amber stood, tears breaking loose now. "I have to," she said. "For you. For her. For the peace you both deserve." "Amber." She turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "Please don't make this harder." That night, after he and Emma were asleep, she packed quietly. Just a few things: Malik's blanket, a change of clothes, a small rattle Emma had given him shaped like a star. She didn't take the money Edward had set aside for her. She couldn't. On the desk in his office, she left a folded piece of paper, her handwriting small and careful. "Edward, you gave us back our dignity. That's enough. Don't lose everything because of me. You have a daughter who needs your light. Don't let my shadow take it from you." Amber. By dawn, she was gone. When Edward woke, Emma was already calling for Malik, her little voice echoing through the halls. He followed the sound to the nursery, but it was empty. The crib was gone, the soft toys stacked neatly by the window. And on the desk, her note. He read it once, twice, each word slicing deeper. He could barely breathe. The letter shook in his hand as he sank into the chair, staring at the paper that felt like a final goodbye. Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bear. "Daddy," she said softly, "where's Miss Amber?" He didn't answer. "Where's Malik?" He couldn't. His throat burned. Emma's eyes filled with tears, small and trembling. "Did they go because of me?" Edward gathered her into his arms, holding her close as she sobbed against his chest. "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "They went because the world doesn't understand kindness anymore." Her tiny hands gripped his collar, desperate. "Then go make them understand, Daddy. Go bring them back." He closed his eyes, pain crashing through him. Outside, the city was grey and ruthless. News vans blocked his building, their cameras pointed like weapons. Protesters chanted, reporters shouted questions, flashes of light blinding him as he stepped into the storm. He didn't care. He got into his car, following the only clue he had, a hunch. The last time Amber had nowhere to go, she'd gone to the old women's shelter near the West Loop, the one with the faded mural on its brick wall. Snow thickened as he drove. His tire skidded once on the ice, but he pressed forward, jaw clenched, eyes searching every face on the sidewalk. When he finally found her, she was standing outside the shelter, clutching Malik close under her coat. Snowflakes clung to her hair. Her eyes were red, her face pale from a cold. "Amber," he called, stepping out. She froze. "You shouldn't be here." He strode toward her, his breath clouding in the freezing air. "You think I care what anyone says? Let them talk." His voice cracked. "You're not going anywhere." Her lips trembled. "Edward, please. They'll destroy you." He shook his head. "Then they'll have to come through me first." She shook her head, crying now, every word a plea. "You don't understand. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," he shouted, the words tearing out of him. "Because somewhere between that park bench and now, you became the only thing worth fighting for." The wind howled between them. Malik stirred, whimpering softly in her arms. For a long moment, they just stood there, the world falling apart around them, snow thickening, streetlights flickering through the storm. Then Edward stepped forward, slowly, gently wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Come home," he said softly. "Not for me. For Emma. For him." Amber looked down at her son, then up at him. Her voice broke. "How do you still believe in me?" He smiled faintly. "Because you never stopped believing in everyone else." And just like that, something inside her cracked open. The walls she'd built to protect them all came crumbling down. She nodded, tears freezing on her lashes. When they walked back to the car, Emma's little voice echoed in Edward's memory. "Go bring them back, Daddy." He had. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the battle. It was only the beginning of a fight for truth, for love, for peace neither of them had ever known. Back home, Emma ran to meet them at the door, her laughter echoing through the halls like sunlight breaking through clouds. Amber knelt, letting Emma wrap her arms around her. Malik reached for Emma's hair, cooing softly. Edward watched them, three souls that had found each other against all odds. The storm outside still raged, but for the first time in days, he didn't feel its cold. He knew Maddox wasn't done. The world wasn't done. But tonight, they had each other. And that was enough to face the coming dawn. If you were Amber, would you have left to protect Edward, or stayed and fought beside him? Comment your thoughts below. The following morning, Edward didn't go into the office. For the first time in years, he ignored the endless calls from shareholders, ignored his assistant's messages about urgent board concerns, and instead sat at his dining table staring at the stack of files spread before him. Hospital reports, press clippings, Amber's old nursing records. Every line, every accusation. The story didn't make sense, and it never had. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion carving deeper lines into his face. Amber had spent the night upstairs, sleeping lightly beside Malik. He could hear the faint sound of her voice humming a lullaby, soothing the child. The sound tore at him, not with pain, but with resolve. He couldn't let this end with whispers and half-truths. Not after everything she had endured. Not after everything they had begun to mean to each other. Edward stood, pulling his coat from the back of the chair. He made a single call to his driver. "Find out where Dr. Henry Cooper practices now," he said. "I don't care if it takes all day." It took 2 hours. Cooper had left the hospital after the scandal and joined a private clinic on the north side. A small, discreet practice catering to elite clients who preferred silence over ethics. Perfect. By noon, Edward was standing in the clinic lobby. The receptionist froze the moment she saw him. "Mr. Wallace," she stammered. Do you have an appointment?" "No," he said simply. "But he'll want to see me." When Cooper entered his office, the color drained from his face. He was older now, his once charming smile replaced by the twitch of guilt poorly hidden. "Edward Wallace," he said, forcing a polite tone. "This is unexpected." Edward didn't sit. He placed a folder on the desk, photos, reports, the falsified payment documents Maddox had leaked. "I'm here about Amber Robinson."
Cooper exhalait sharply, feigning surprise.
Still tangled with her, are you? That woman's trouble. You should have cut her loose before she ruined you like she ruined. Like she ruined your career. Edward interrupted coldly. The doctor's smile faltered. Watch your words. Edward leaned closer. No, you watch yours. Because I've had enough of lies destroying innocent people while men like you hide behind white coats and falsify paperwork. He reached into his pocket and pressed a small recorder on the desk. The red light blinked steadily. We are going to talk about the child who died 6 years ago at St. Luke's. About the cover-up you orchestrated to save your own reputation. Cooper's face darkened. I don't know what you're insinuating. Edward's voice remained calm, almost too calm. You signed off on a faulty incubator that malfunctioned during Amber's shift. The hospital traced it back to a supply company your brother-in-law owns. You blamed her to keep your name clean. Cooper froze, eyes flicking to the recorder. You have no proof. Edward opened another folder and slid a printed email across the desk. I do now. An internal memo from St. Luke's maintenance division, dated the night before the incident. The incubator failure was logged and ignored. You ordered the report deleted. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Cooper sank into his chair, his arrogance cracking. You don't understand what it was like, he muttered. The press, the lawsuits, it would have destroyed the hospital. The board demanded a scapegoat, and she was the easiest one. Edward's jaw tightened. She was pregnant. Homeless. You left her to die in the cold. Cooper's voice trembled. I didn't mean for it to go that far. It was supposed to be temporary. She was meant to sign a statement clearing the hospital, and we would have reinstated her once things quieted down. Edward leaned forward. Then why forge the payout documents? Cooper's silence was the confession. His hand shook as he pressed his palms to his face. Maddox offered money, he said finally. He came to me months ago, said he wanted leverage against you. I didn't think I didn't think he'd make it public. Edward's voice hardened. You ruined her life twice, for profit and for cowardice. Cooper looked up, eyes hollow. What are you going to do? Edward reached for the recorder. What I should have done from the start. Tell the truth. By the next morning, every news outlet in Chicago buzzed with one announcement. Edward Wallace would be holding a live press conference at noon from Wallace Tower. Amber didn't know. She had gone out early with Malik to pick up groceries, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But as she passed a cafe, the TV in the window caught her eye. Edward stood behind a podium, flanked by reporters and flashing cameras. The Wallace Holdings logo glimmered faintly behind him. Her breath caught. He looked different, composed, resolute, but with a fire she hadn't seen before. Emma stood beside him, small and still, clutching his hand. Edward cleared his throat. The room quieted. Thank you all for coming, he began. I have a few truths to share today. He explained everything. The fake payout, the hospital cover-up, the negligence that cost a child's life. Then he played the recording. Cooper's trembling voice filled the air. The board demanded a scapegoat. She was the easiest one. Gasps echoed. Cameras flashed wildly. Edward's tone never wavered. Amber Robinson was not negligent. She was the only one who tried to save that child. She lost everything because she told the truth, and I almost lost her because I believed the lies. He paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. If compassion and integrity threaten a company's reputation, then I no longer want that kind of company. Reporters shouted questions, but Edward raised a hand. You want a headline, he said. Here it is. She's innocent. And if the world can't see that, it's blind. As he stepped away from the podium, Emma tugged at his sleeve and whispered something. He nodded, smiling faintly. The little girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper sign, hand-colored with crayons. She lifted it high for the cameras. In red letters, it read, Thank you, Miss Amber, for saving my brother and my daddy. The image went viral before the press conference even ended. At that very moment, Amber stood outside the cafe, one hand over her mouth, tears blurring the screen. The world around her felt muted. Traffic, voices, the cold, all fading under the weight of disbelief and release. After years of shame, someone had finally said her name with pride. A passerby noticed her crying. Hey, miss, are you okay? Amber smiled through her tears. I think I will be. Back at Wallace Tower, chaos erupted. Dr. Cooper issued a statement hours later, admitting full responsibility and resigning from his clinic. Maddox disappeared from the news altogether, his own firm under investigation for corporate defamation. The hospital reopened Amber's case and cleared her record publicly. But Edward didn't care about the legalities. All he cared about was finding her. He left the building the moment the cameras shut off. He knew where she'd gone before he even called. There was only one place she felt safe, the women's shelter. When he arrived, the matron at the desk smiled knowingly and gestured toward the back garden. "She's been out there since the news broke," she said softly. Amber sat on a bench, Malik asleep in her arms, snow beginning to fall again. She didn't notice Edward until his shadow crossed her lap. "Did you mean every word?" she asked without looking up. "Every one," he said quietly. She exhaled shakily. "You didn't have to risk everything for me." He knelt before her, eyes steady. "You risked everything just by surviving. The least I could do was tell the world who you really are." Amber's lips trembled, her gaze meeting his. For the first time in years, there was no fear in her eyes, only warmth. "Edward." He reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You can stop running now." Behind them, the faint sound of laughter drifted from the shelter windows. Children playing, the world still spinning, still imperfect, but somehow lighter. Edward looked at Malik, sleeping peacefully. "He looks stronger," he said softly. Amber smiled. "He is. We both are." For a long moment, they just sat there, snowflakes catching in their hair, the air filled with something too fragile to name and too powerful to ignore. Somewhere deep inside, Edward felt the storm that had raged in his chest for years finally begin to quiet. They didn't need to say the rest, not yet. Truth had finally done what love alone could not. It set them free. If you were Amber, would you forgive the world that wronged you, or walk away to start anew? Share your thoughts below. A week passed before Edward saw her again. The city had quieted, as if tired from its own cruelty. The snow that once fell in relentless storms now came softer, slower, gentle flakes that dusted rooftops and melted on cheeks before they could sting. Chicago felt lighter, cleaner, as though forgiveness itself had settled over it. But Edward wasn't at peace. The truth was out, yes. Amber's name had been cleared. His company had survived. Cooper was disgraced, Maddox forgotten. Yet something inside him still ached, a space that only widened with each day she stayed gone. He had visited the shelter twice, leaving notes she never answered. He had left messages, sent flowers, even a soft toy for Malik that Emma picked out herself, a little brown teddy bear with a red bow. Nothing brought her back. Until that morning. Edward's driver pulled the car into Lincoln Park, the same park where everything had begun. Snow fell in lazy spirals, coating the benches, the old trees, and the path that wound toward the lake. It was early enough that the world still felt half asleep. The city's noise softened under a white hush. And then he saw her. Amber sat on the same bench from that first night, her dark coat dusted with snowflakes, Malik bundled in her arms, smiling faintly as if he could sense peace returning to his mother. She was staring at the skyline, lost in thought. Edward stepped out of the car slowly, his heart hammering harder with every step. Each crunch of his shoes against the snow felt louder than the last. He stopped a few feet away, afraid to startle her. Amber looked up before he could speak. Her eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and something else, something soft. "Edward," she breathed. He smiled faintly. "I thought I'd find you here." Amber looked down at Malik, who gurgled and reached toward the falling snow, his tiny hands grasping at the air. "He likes the cold," she said quietly. "It doesn't scare him anymore." Edward's gaze softened. "He's stronger now." "So am I," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He nodded, stepping closer. "I can see that." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of wind moved between them, rustling the branches above. Then, Edward sank slowly to one knee in the snow, exactly as he had that night when he first laid his coat over Malik. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a depth of emotion that words couldn't fully carry. "You saved us too, Amber," he said quietly. "You gave Emma her laughter back. You gave me a reason to feel again. Please, come home." Amber's breath hitched. She blinked rapidly, her lashes catching the snow. "Home," she whispered. "You mean your home?" He shook his head gently. "Our home. If you'll let it be." Her fingers tightened around Malik's blanket, her gaze darting away. "Edward, I can't, she said softly. People already think I used you once. If I come back, they'll just talk, he finished for her. They already do. They talked when I was heartless, and they'll talk now that I finally have a heart. She looked at him then, really looked, and her resolve faltered. You don't know what you're asking for, she said. The world doesn't forgive easily. Not for people like me. He smiled, a small, broken thing that still somehow carried warmth. Then let them choke on their unforgiveness. I'm not asking for perfection, Amber. I'm asking for partnership. Partnership. He nodded, his breath visible in the cold. For the Wallace Foundation. For everything we started. I want you to run it with me, to help mothers and children like you once were. You have the heart for it, and I have the means. Together, we can turn everything they mocked into something that matters. Amber stared at him, torn between disbelief and hope. You mean that? I've never meant anything more. He paused, his tone softening. And maybe, we can build something else, too. She frowned slightly, confused. Something else. Edward's gaze didn't waver. A life. Not out of guilt or rescue, but choice. A life built on what we've both learned. The kind of life where compassion doesn't need to be defended. Amber's throat tightened. Edward. He reached out, not touching her yet, but letting his hand hover close enough that she could feel the warmth. I'm not offering pity, he said, echoing the words he once spoke to her in the snow. I'm offering warmth. Tears spilled down her cheeks then, unbidden, hot against the chill air. She pressed her face against Malik's soft hat, whispering something too faint to hear. When she looked up again, her eyes shimmered. You don't make it easy to walk away, she said. He smiled. Good. Because I don't intend to. Amber laughed, a small, shaky sound that broke into a sob halfway through. Malik cooed at her voice, reaching out toward Edward's face with an innocent curiosity that melted them both. Edward took that as his answer. Gently, he stood and reached for Malik, waiting for Amber's nod before lifting the boy into his arms. Malik giggled, his tiny hand gripping Edward's tie with surprising strength. You see. Edward murmured. He already knows who I am. Amber watched him, heart swelling with an emotion she had spent months trying to suppress. For so long, her life had been about survival, scraping by, enduring, avoiding hope because hope hurt too much when it broke. But looking at Edward holding Malik, with the same care and tenderness he gave Emma, something inside her finally healed. They stood together for a long while, silent except for Malik's laughter and the whisper of snow. Finally, Amber said softly, Are you sure about this? The world isn't kind to stories like ours. Edward turned toward her, his expression gentle but certain. Then we'll write our own kind of story. She exhaled shakily, and in that breath was surrender, not defeat, but peace. Okay, she whispered. We'll go home. He smiled then, one of those rare, unguarded smiles that made his whole face younger. You'll never regret it. I already don't, she said. They walked back together, the same path where it all began, snow crunching softly beneath their steps. Edward carried Malik in one arm, Amber's gloved hand in the other. The park lights glowed golden against the twilight, and for the first time, the cold didn't bite, it soothed. When they reached the car, Emma was waiting inside, her face pressed eagerly to the window. The moment she saw Amber, she burst out the door, running through the snow. Miss Amber, she shouted, throwing her arms around her legs. You came back. Amber knelt, hugging her tightly. I told you I'd never forget you, she whispered. Emma looked up, grinning through the flurries. Daddy said we are all family now. Is that true? Amber met Edward's eyes across the car roof. If he meant it, she said softly, then yes. Edward smiled. He did. As they drove home, the world outside their windows glimmered with reflections of light, street lamps glowing through snow, shop windows warm with golden hues. Inside the car, silence fell again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind of silence that follows peace. Amber glanced out the window, watching the city blur by. Her hand brushed Edward's where it rested on the seat between them. Neither pulled away. When they reached the penthouse, Emma darted ahead, eager to show Malik his new crib, already set up beside her bed. Amber stopped at the doorway, taking in the familiar warmth, the scent of home-cooked food, the quiet hum of safety. She turned to Edward, voice trembling slightly. I never thought I'd feel safe again. He looked at her, his gaze soft. "You don't have to think it anymore," he said. "Just believe it." Amber smiled through her tears. For once, she did. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. And in one quiet penthouse high above it all, warmth finally returned, not from the fireplaces or the lights, but from the simple, unstoppable truth that two broken souls had finally found their way home. If you were Amber, would you trust love again after losing everything? Or would you protect your heart? Share your thoughts below. Spring came softly that year, as if the city itself was tired of being cold. Chicago's streets shed their icy armor, and the first tulips broke through the thawing earth. The wind still carried a chill, but it was gentler now, more like a memory of winter than its echo. Months had passed since that morning in Lincoln Park when Amber had finally said yes. Yes to coming home. Yes to starting again. Yes to believing that kindness could last longer than a season. Now, she stood inside the bright glass atrium of the Wallace Foundation for Child Wellness, her name engraved alongside Edward's on the plaque by the entrance. The sound of quiet chatter, soft laughter, and the hum of purpose filled the space. Volunteers moved through the halls with baskets of baby formula, blankets, and supplies. The walls were covered in artwork, Emma's drawings, and some done by the children they had helped. Amber walked through it all with a clipboard in hand, her presence calm but commanding. It had taken her months to grow into this role, to stop seeing herself as someone rescued and start seeing herself as someone rebuilding. The foundation wasn't just a charity to her, it was redemption made real. She paused by a young mother cradling an infant in the lounge. "How's he doing today?" Amber asked warmly. The woman smiled, tired but grateful. "Better. The doctors say he's gaining weight again." Amber knelt, brushing the baby's tiny hand with her finger. "That's wonderful. Keep resting, all right? You're doing amazing." As she rose, she caught sight of a familiar figure through the front windows. Edward, stepping out of his car with Emma skipping beside him and Malik toddling just behind, clutching his little red teddy bear by the ear. Amber's heart softened instantly. Edward entered, holding a bouquet of white lilies in one hand, her favorite, and a mischievous smile in the other. "Madam Director," he said playfully, bowing slightly, "we have a board inspection to conduct." Amber crossed her arms, laughing. "Board inspection? Or family visit?" "Both," he admitted. "We've come to ensure the snacks are still up to standard." Emma grinned and darted past him, running straight for Amber. "Miss Amber, Daddy let me pick the flowers." Amber crouched to her level. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." Emma giggled. "Daddy said they're like you, pretty but impossible to ignore." Edward groaned softly. "I didn't say impossible." Amber raised a brow. "Oh, didn't you?" The playful tension lingered, sweet and unspoken. Malik squealed then, letting go of Edward's hand to wobble toward Amber. She caught him just before he tripped, his laughter ringing through the hall. "Someone's getting faster," she said, holding him up. Edward watched them both, something like awe flickering in his eyes. The way she held Malik, the way Emma looked at her, it was more than comfort. It was belonging. That afternoon, after the staff meeting ended, they decided to visit the park. It was Edward's idea, though Amber suspected Emma had begged him first. Lincoln Park looked different now. The snow was gone, replaced by a sea of green grass and scattered blossoms. The bench where Amber had once sat, trembling and half frozen, now stood surrounded by tulips. The world felt brighter, softer. Edward pushed a double swing gently, Emma in one seat, Malik in the other, laughing so hard he could barely keep his balance. The sound of their joy mixed with the wind, a melody too beautiful to ever fade. Amber sat nearby on the same bench, sketchbook in hand. Her pencil moved slowly, capturing the scene, the sunlight on Edward's face, Emma's curls flying wild, Malik's chubby fists gripping the chains. When she looked up, Edward caught her gaze. He smiled, that same quiet smile she had come to know meant more than words ever could. Emma twisted in her swing, her little voice cutting through the air. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." She grinned wide. "Can we keep her forever?" Amber's heart skipped. She lowered her pencil, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Edward slowed the swing, his eyes soft as he looked toward Amber. "I hope she never leaves," he said simply. For a heartbeat, the world held still. The words hung in the air, light but certain. Amber looked away quickly, pretending to focus on her drawing, but tears blurred her vision again. Only this time, they weren't from pain. They were from peace. Malik's laugh broke the spell as he clapped his tiny hands, delighted by nothing in particular. Emma reached out to steady him, and Edward laughed too, the sound full of life, full of something he hadn't known he still possessed. As the sun dipped low, the sky flushed gold and pink. Amber finished her sketch and tore the page from her book. When Edward came to sit beside her, brushing a leaf from her shoulder, she handed it to him. He looked down at the drawing, a portrait of the four of them, smiling beneath the same oak tree where they now sat today. Across the top, she had written one line in careful handwriting. Some families are found, not born. Edward traced the words with his thumb. You still think of yourself as found? Amber smiled faintly. No. I think of myself as finally home. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then so am I. They sat there quietly, watching the children chase butterflies across the grass. Emma picked a flower and tucked it behind Malik's ear, and he giggled as if she'd just performed magic. Amber leaned against Edward, just slightly. He didn't move away. The breeze picked up, and for the briefest moment, just as the day slipped into evening, a few soft flakes of snow began to fall from a passing cloud. It was strange, unexpected, almost impossible in late spring. But they both looked up at the sky and smiled. It wasn't cold this time. It was warm, the kind of snow that melted on skin as soon as it touched. Edward reached for Amber's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. You know, he murmured, I used to think success was measured in numbers. Now I think it's in moments like this. Amber turned toward him. And what's this moment worth? He looked at her, his eyes full of quiet certainty. Everything. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The city around them hummed with distant traffic, laughter, and life. The snow faded, the air cooling into twilight. Emma and Malik chased the last rays of sunlight, their laughter echoing into the golden hour. Amber closed her eyes, letting it all sink in, the peace, the sound of their children, the heartbeat beside her. She had been through fire and frost, through judgment and fear. But sitting there, surrounded by the people who had seen her not as a burden but as a blessing, she finally understood that redemption wasn't something given. It was something built. And they had built it, together. As night fell and the city lights flickered on, Edward gathered Malik into his arms, and Emma tugged Amber's hand toward the car. Amber turned for one last look at the bench, the park, the place where everything began. It no longer looked like the place of her lowest moment. It looked like home. The family walked toward the car, laughter following them through the crisp air. Above, the snow that wasn't supposed to fall drifted gently through the glow of the streetlights, disappearing into the warmth below. And as they drove away, the city stretched before them, alive, forgiving, endless. In the distance, the radio played softly, a song about love that survives winters and finds its spring. Amber leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur into gold and silver. In a quiet voice, she whispered, "Thank you, Emma." Edward glanced at her. "For what?" Amber smiled. "For seeing what I almost missed." He reached over, his fingers brushing hers. It wasn't just Emma who saw it. Outside, the snow fell lighter still, soft, forgiving, and bright against the dark. Because in a city built on ambition and power, it had taken a child's compassion to remind them that love, like snow, can fall anywhere, softening even the hardest hearts.